Tobias, I thought it would be really helpful if, as you recall it, how you think about intellectual vitality came about.
Intellectual vitality comes from what I hope to find at Harvard when getting my acceptance letter and before then. It was the vision of coming to campus, being exposed to people from all across the country, all across the world, and being part of a shared endeavor to search for veritas, to search for truth, to see how we disagree with one another, how we agree with one another, and to learn the skills necessary to really go out into the world and make a difference and find out what's right for us and right for others.
And at what moment did you sort of get dissatisfied or feel like, wait, I was expecting something else? Because it's clear, like, there's this notion in psychology called expectancy theory, and then, like, the gap between what you expect and what's actually you experience. Like, when did that happen for you?
Pretty much immediately when I came to campus and went into the dining hall. I was always going up to meet new people, ask for their stories, and then engage on pressing controversial issues. And unfortunately, I found that the range of perspectives that people were willing to frankly discuss was quite limited. And I was really looking to get the benefit of the really diverse voices and unique perspectives that Harvard had to offer. And it just wasn't occurring in the dining halls, it wasn't occurring in the classes I was attending, and it wasn't occurring in casual social circumstances.
Can I dig into that a
Yeah.
little bit? You said there was a range that existed, or was it that people, the range didn't exist, or that there's a wider range that you suspected than what people would articulate? Like, which one was it, or some combination of the three?
Yeah, so I think it was a wider range among everyone present than was being vocalized in public spaces. And so the way this occurs is you might sit down at a table with 7 people, you might know 2 of them, the remaining 5 you don't know at all. Actually, I got my math wrong there. I study history.
Because you were one of the, I was just going to ask, how did this work out with the
math? Nonetheless, so you sit down at a table with a group of 8 people, and you might know 2, and then the remaining you've never met before. And with those people, you want to get to know them and hear their perspective, and yet the range of views just tended to focus around one. And yet, one-on-one, if you were to sit down with your friend or with one of the new people and you'd ask them what their views actually were on politics, international relations, ethics, or religion, they'd have a very interesting, unique perspective, but it just wasn't coming out in the actual conversations with a group of other people.
So then what happened?
Well, then COVID hit and we were moved all online. I was enrolled in a course with Professor Ned Hall on formal logic called Logic as a Force for Good. And in office hours with him, we started discussing how these conversations in the search for truth, trying to get to know others and understand the world, weren't really facilitated by the in-person experiences that he and other students had, as well as the online format. And then I reached out to you during your office hours. We had a 20-minute...
On Zoom?
On Zoom. Well, actually, we had a 20-minute phone call.
Yes.
And you said, that sounds deeply concerning and we should have a follow-up. So we had another conversation. Ned Hall and I spoke with other students, other friends, and you asked us to get a group together. And as soon as we were back on campus, we were meeting over meals and sketching out what was wrong with campus discourse, how we could make it better. And over the preceding 3 or so years, we've then started a new initiative.
Yeah, you know, I remember that conversation really well because I had been having conversations with students and some faculty, and it was a little bit, I was getting very weird signals. I remember this because some people say, I can't believe this is being taught at Harvard. And other people saying, you know, I thought we'd talk more about certain things. And yet I also felt people wanted the same thing, which is they wanted to like have an intense intellectual discussion. So wherever people were coming from, what was really interesting about, you know, debating whether something should be taught or not, or people feeling like, oh, I want to talk more about something. The thing that was really interesting is that people wanted to talk more, or debate, or dialogue, or understand a different perspective. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, yet people had very different like ideas about how to get there. And I think that was when I said, you know, this is kind of fitting a larger pattern of not just classroom discussions, but the way people were talking about what was happening in the sort of among their friend groups, among their residential community.
Yeah, so I think with friend groups, the people would just not talk about politics or not talk about personal backgrounds that might differ with the assumed consensus on campus. Because in order to build the relationships that people find so important on campus, you really need to hold yourself back a little bit and not be willing to share some of the perhaps controversial views that one has. But when I came to campus, that was exactly the kind of conversation I wanted to have, and that was exactly the kind of conversation that I know other friends wanted to have. But there was something about just the lack of consensus about everyone wanting to have those conversations that held us back. I think if we had a clear signal that we're here to have disagreement, we're here to learn from each other, then that would have really opened up a lot of conversations.
Why did you feel there was not a clear signal? I mean, especially a place where you can't walk 10 feet without seeing the word veritas.
Yeah, well, one, that's in Latin, and so it requires a bit of translation. And I think that Harvard is not a bubble. We are coming, all the students come from the world. At the end of the day, professors go back to their homes. We read the news, and we're aware of just how much difficulty there is within political discourse in the United States, how much polarization there is, how difficult it is to speak with our neighbors if we disagree with them. And so we come with a lot of that baggage when we get to campus. Here, we are in an environment where we can have those frank discussions with one another.
So I noticed you just sort of pivoted to the we part. So tell us a little bit about, like, when did you start connecting with other students around this, and like how did we find ourselves in my office?
Yeah. So freshman year, making friends, you want to learn about your friends, and immediately I would be asking them about themselves, they'd be asking me about myself, and we'd have frank conversations. And then at some point, maybe half an hour into the conversation, we'd say to each other, well, here's a thought I have, but I'm not really comfortable sharing with it because I haven't had a context to do that yet, but because I'm now friends with you, I'm willing to do so. And once you reach that kind of comfort with someone, that facilitates gaining further trust in other friends. And when you're able to do that, you see, wow, everyone really has fascinating perspectives, and it'd be just great if we all were comfortable sharing that with one another. And so through those kinds of conversations, I felt like a change would have to be made, and your office, or at least coming to speak with you, seemed like the best and most direct way to do that. And so you were receptive, and we ended up having a lot of meetings and conversations, bringing in friends, bringing in other classmates into them.
Yeah, you know, it's funny is because after we talked and you said, oh, you were taking Professor Hall's class, I was sitting on the faculty council, and Professor Hall was one of the faculty members, and he had voiced this concern and issue in a just kind of offhanded remark in a faculty council meeting. And I said, oh, I'm meeting with some students about this. Why don't you come and join us in this discussion? And then we realized we were talking about the same students. And I think what was really just interesting about that is, like, at one level, Harvard feels so big, and another level, like, it was so small that if I hadn't been sitting next to Professor Hall, and there was another faculty member, Professor Oberg, who also is in the astronomy department, and she expressed her questions around this, and I think we suddenly started finding ourselves meeting on a more regular basis, and you started bringing more and more friends, and we started saying, do you know anybody else who wants to be involved? Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely. And we would meet in various spaces around campus, in between classes, and whenever one of us had someone else who decided, oh, we really care about having a frank conversation, they'd also join along as well. And eventually other professors would start learning about this, and they'd come up to students and they'd say, you know, I really want to talk about this in class, but I'm not sure if it's really the space to do that. And we said, well, you should talk more about that with your colleagues. And we just started having these conversations in various spaces.
Yeah, and then that was really the fall after we had just returned back to campus. What started shifting there where it started kind of coalescing more into not just a group of concerned individuals, but something that felt like something more bigger than that? Like, do you remember that moment?
I mean, it was always a community activity, I'd say. In order to have the confidence to come and say there needs to be change at Harvard, one needs to feel like there are other people who agree. And so from the beginning, in order to develop the trust to say, I have controversial views or I disagree on a certain topic, there needs to be people who one feels are willing to engage. And so I think it always felt like a communitarian activity.
I remember one of the things that we would sometimes meet, as you said, was in the basement conference room in this building. And I remember we were talking, and then I remember, like, trying to just, like, capture stuff that you were saying and the students were saying, and Professor Hall and Oberg were saying on the whiteboard. I don't know if you ever remember that moment.
Yeah, so we would have face masks on. It was in the middle of COVID, and we'd get into a room, and we'd have salads or whatever foods we were eating, and then we would all sit and throw ideas on a board. You'd write them down, and we'd just spell out the difficulties we were seeing, possible solutions, and the tangible steps to get from the vision we had to an actual reality on campus.
Oh, I forgot. That's right. We first started with our aspirations. Like we put them all on the right-hand side of the board. This is the kind of ideal college campus that we would like.
Yes.
This is the kind of ideal college experience we would like. And then we sort of, I think, deconstructed it. Well, what would that take? And then what were the things that were getting in the way of that? And I remember because I think we really wanted to get to root causes. Like, because I think it was so complex at one level, like just how could this happen? There wasn't a simple solution here.
And these challenges, they begin much earlier than when you arrive at college. It's really the education we have in high school, the range of perspectives that we're exposed to, and whether or not we have the capacity to speak and to listen attentively to people we disagree with. And that's a skill set, and it's something that Harvard is now trying to teach students, which I think is fantastic, but it's something that I'm not sure people were really aware of as a particular skill set that needed to be addressed in college before we started having these conversations.
I remember that one of the ways that we had celebrated a semester of all of us coming together to meet was to organize a dinner. Mm-hmm. And it was outside because that was the only way you could eat. And I remember the conversation, one kind of thing that we went around the table, because I think not everybody could always go every time. And so some people, we had never all been together as the full group. And we started going around, why did you get involved in this? Like, what was the concerns you had? Do you remember what you said?
Yes. So I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there I learned a lot about nuclear history, and I was really terrified about the existential threat of nuclear weapons, and not a lot of people were talking about it. But for me, the only way that humanity could come together to prevent a nuclear apocalypse or another world war was if we actually had conversations with one another. So as abstract and removed as that might seem from the concerns of a high school or a college student, it connected intimately to the conversations that I felt I'd be able to have at Harvard, because this is a global environment, and if we are to learn how to prevent global conflict, then we need to really be able to speak from people from all across the world, and that it goes directly to intellectual vitality and ensuring that people are comfortable being honest about their views and their backgrounds.
Was that the time where the first draft of the statement had been written? Or, because I do remember like us like pulling it up on Google Docs, but I want to make sure that was like a real memory, right?
So I think we may have pulled up a draft of it then. It's been through 8 or 9 iterations. As more people come on, more people started to work on it. We've tried to exemplify the values of intellectual vitality in drafting the statements, because we didn't just all want to get together and agree. None of us had the same exact perspective about what academic freedom and free exchange of ideas on campus meant. And so we really had debates and we had arguments, but then we were able to produce something tangible that we all came together to agree upon.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I remember, all the different comments on the side of the Google Doc.
Yeah.
There was like a lot of editing and editorials, and then I remember Professor Hall coming in with his like kind of, references back to certain Greek, rules of dialogue and discussion. And the one pivot I remember what Professor Hall really put in was the role of listening. Mm. And
listening charitably.
Yes, yeah. That was a very poignant moment for me. What was like, what did that mean to you? Because I remember like all of us kind of held on to that notion of listening charitably, assuming good intentions. Like, do you remember that?
Absolutely, and I think that speaks to the heart of what we're trying to do and the spirit we're trying to build on campus. So it's not just sitting across from someone, hearing what they have to say, checking it off a list, and then arguing against what they're doing. That's a pure debate where you're trying to score points. And what we're trying to build on campus, I think, is an initiative where people are listening so that they can actually try to see from another person's perspective, understand how just because they disagree on something that I hold really dear to myself, it doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're illogical or irrational. But when we're able to see, oh, I understand why you believe that, and I'm able to empathize with you, that opens up new possibilities for bridging friendships, coming to agreements in various contexts that isn't possible when we just see someone else's perspective as a competing point.
Okay, so we're having these conversations in 2020, 2021, and now here we are in 2024, you're about to graduate. What's your reflection? There's like a website now.
Yeah.
There's like, what does it make you think about? How do you reflect on it? And then maybe you could also say, what would you hope when you come back for your 5th-year reunion?
It's been a long process, and it's a slow process to make change, to try to start something new. But if you get enough people interested, then there becomes a kind of energy that people want to contribute to, and people recognized that the lack of academic freedom and open discourse on campus was a real issue, and that sparked a drive to push this through to the end. And so now I'm really excited for the new classes of students that are going to arrive, that are going to be able to experience the full range of programs and ideas that we've put together to try to help facilitate those conversations that I wasn't able to have during my freshman year, to really build a community that's able to engage in global challenges and global conversations, and so that we're able to really learn from each other and all the diverse perspectives that we bring.
I know this is not your nature, but I hope you take a little pride in what you've done and where we are now. I know we have more to go. There's no single panacea. I think that was one of the things we figured out on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
There's no simple solution. There's no silver bullet here. I hope you take some pride in what you started and the fact that it's now programmatic. It is, last night I was at an event where somebody who was coming back for their 40th reunion said that, one of the things that he most wanted for Harvard was a campus of intellectual vitality. And I was like, I immediately turned over and looked at Amanda, and we looked at each other. So, I mean, how does that make you feel?
I'm very happy, but as you said, when it comes to my nature, I want things set in stone. And I want to return to campus and see everyone having these conversations and feeling comfortable to put themselves kind of on the line and be true to who they are and to share that with others and to not feel the threat of being judgment. So when that day occurs, I'll come back and I'll feel like my mission has been achieved.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tobias.
Thank you.